Reflecting on my past, I could never have predicted the unexpected paths my life would take. In my younger days, I was so certain about everything, filled with confidence and optimism. I was just starting out, full of dreams, hardly even considering the possibility of setbacks. My aspirations were straightforward but genuine: a loving family, a successful career, and perhaps some adventure along the way. I was a humble person, rarely seeking attention, but always giving my best. Even as life's challenges started to emerge, I believed hard work and dedication could overcome any obstacle. Meeting Jennifer was like the beginning of a movie I never expected to star in. She entered my life quietly, without much fuss, but her impact was profound. From that moment, everything seemed to center on building a future together. Our relationship was built on what I believed was mutual respect, trust, and a love that could withstand any hardship. I immersed myself in my career, always aiming to give our family the best life possible. But as time passed, subtle changes began eroding the foundation we had built, and the life I had carefully constructed started to unravel in ways I never foresaw. I was at my desk, staring at the computer, when Jennifer walked in. It was becoming a habit, her returning late from work without much explanation. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the kids had eaten, done their homework, and gone to bed long before. They no longer asked about her absence, which deeply troubled me. The kids had adjusted to her late arrivals, and honestly, so had I. As I went over our finances, I couldn't ignore the reality any longer. In the past 2 years, our financial situation had taken a serious downturn. Our income had dropped significantly, yet Jennifer remained seemingly oblivious, spending as if nothing had changed. After paying the last of the bills, I calculated we could barely scrape by for another couple of months. I don't know how long she stood there looking at me. Lately, I've been losing myself in my thoughts more often, sometimes losing track of time. Finally, with her arms crossed and that all-too-familiar look of contempt, she spoke. "Michael, I want a divorce." I'm not sure what I felt at that moment. My mind was so weighed down with doubt and self-loathing that I was nearly numb to new emotions. It wasn't exactly funny, but I still had to stifle a laugh. My wife of 17 years just told me it's over, that everything we'd built together would soon be torn apart. I hadn't felt this kind of emotion in a long time, and it almost made me smile. Relief washed over me as I stole a brief glance at her, savoring one final moment of our happier times together, before grounding myself back in reality. "Fine," I said. I'd always been better at programming than managing, but programmers get promoted to project managers, then department heads, and eventually senior management. That's how I ended up as a senior product development manager. It was just a fancy title for a salesman. At the time, I was the most qualified for the role. I had nearly single-handedly created our flagship product line. I'd nurtured it from its infancy and developed it through 6 upgrades. I knew the product better than anyone. When clients had questions, I had answers. When employees had issues, I knew how to solve them. With a new haircut and an expensive suit, I looked the part. The pay raise and benefits with the promotion didn't hurt either. I'd say I was mostly satisfied with my job, but I loved programming and missed it a lot. In my role, I simply didn't have the opportunity. There were too many meetings and calls to get back to lines of code. I was forced to watch a new generation of bright-eyed employees try to outdo each other with their latest developments. I won't lie, being the boss had its perks, but I always wished my responsibilities were a bit different. It wasn't surprising when I was fired from Chicago Technology Solutions. In their place, I would have done the same. My attendance at meetings was sporadic at best, and I'd missed too many deadlines. At the time, I hadn't tried to get fired, but I hadn't exactly fought to keep my job either. After leaving CTS, I was in a deep depression for months. It took me nearly 3 months to crawl out of it and try to move forward. But this didn't exactly end in success either. It took me another month to find a way out of the mess I'd landed in, or at least one I could live with. I might have lost my mind if it weren't for the kids. Their consistent routine helped me regain some balance. Breakfast, school, snacks, homework, dinner, and sleep. Breakfast, school, snacks, homework, dinner, and bed. This routine became my mantra, helping me find my way again. I threw myself into life as a stay-at-home dad, taking on all the housework and taxi duties. The kids genuinely enjoyed having me home, and it reminded me that I had value. I wasn't entirely useless. If my wife noticed these changes in our family dynamic, she never mentioned it. I'm pretty sure she didn't even see it. I met Jennifer Riley at a frat party, even though I almost didn't go. I had joined the fraternity for the connections it might bring after college, not for the parties during it. I figured I'd need every advantage I could get. Academically, I was doing well, so that wasn't an issue. But in every other way, I was just average. My height, weight, looks, personality, all average. Even my name, Michael, was the most common name from 1961 to 1988. Completely average. To be honest, away from the computer, there wasn't much that stood out about me. Dating? I went on a few dates. Relationships? Not really. I was pretty good at being on my own, even in my senior year of college, until I saw Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was almost as ordinary as I was, but I noticed that the average woman tends to look better. She was a bit reserved, and I watched her for quite a while before I got the nerve to talk to her. Our first interaction was brief and quiet, but we got to know each other over the next few weeks. We met for coffee, studied together in the library, and after nearly 2 months, we had our first real date. From that moment, the most incredible time in my life began. 15 years of happiness. Our courtship was short and our engagement even shorter. Right after graduation, we got married and moved into our first apartment in Chicago. We commuted together on the morning and evening trains to our first jobs, barely scraping by but happy to be together. We had so much in common: family stories, dating experiences, shared interests, and similar goals. Where we didn't match, we complemented each other. If I couldn't handle something, Jennifer could. If she had a weakness, it was one of my strengths. I managed our finances well, while Jennifer excelled at keeping our social and family schedules in order. We worked as a team, and over the next few years, our lives steadily improved. We both received several promotions, our friend circle expanded, and we saved enough to buy our first home, allowing us to travel and enjoy life. Our physical relationship started out just like the rest of our relationship, slowly. We'd held hands and kissed since our first date and moved to more intimate affection once we were exclusive. We were both maids until the night we got engaged. Since then, our passion grew along with our success. Jennifer left her job 8 years later when our son Jacob was born. A little over a year later, our daughter, Emily, arrived. Yes, I know, their names were the most popular at the time. It had become a family tradition. We bought a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with space for a dog, a family sedan, and a minivan. Life was going well. 2 kids, a pet, a house, and 2 cars. All pretty standard. I didn't think I could be any happier. I was wrong. My promotion to manager came shortly after Emily's first birthday, almost like a reward for years of quiet dedication in the middle class. My new salary wasn't anything extraordinary, but we weren't complaining. I had a flexible schedule and mostly worked from home, only going to the office for meetings. They say money can't buy happiness, and I believe that's true. But it can buy nicer clothes and grooming, better health care, a new home in a nicer neighborhood, and a boost of confidence. I went from average to slightly above average. My wife went from what I thought was beautiful to something undeniably attractive. Our bed life, which I'd always considered good, reached new heights. We traveled more and spent more time with the kids while saving steadily for retirement. When Emily started elementary school, Jennifer decided she wanted to go back to work part-time. She quickly landed a role she was excited about at a new marketing firm. She worked around the kids' school schedule, finishing her day when it was time to pick them up. This was the cherry on top. We didn't need her income, so we saved it. I calculated that by the time the kids graduated college, we'd be able to retire comfortably. I found out my wife was cheating on me by accident 3 months before our 15th anniversary. It happened on my birthday. Or rather, I discovered the clues 2 days before my birthday without realizing it. It took weeks for me to piece everything together. I didn't think much of her wanting to take on a bigger role at work, which meant a few extra hours a week. I started picking up the kids more, and that was fine by me. After a few months, when I noticed she seemed more distracted, I asked her about it. She said she was just stressed from trying to fit in at work, so I took on more around the house to ease her burden. When our once passionate bed life began to wane, we talked about it. She said she was getting older and didn't need as much as before. For a few weeks, our closeness picked up, but then it faded again. I avoided bringing it up again, afraid of starting an argument. I was nearly at my breaking point when I found the gift. The weather had gotten colder, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. Since I had taken over the laundry duties, I sometimes got mixed up about where my clothes went. While sorting through sweaters in her closet, I noticed it tucked behind some old shoeboxes. It was hard to miss. A pink box with a white ribbon from the lingerie store. The card addressed to my beloved got my heart racing. A small battle of thoughts flashed through my mind. Should I look? Should I wait? I wondered. I decided to peek. I wasn't sure I could wait until my birthday to open my wife's gift. After reading the card, I felt both thrilled and uneasy. It read, "Please forgive the packaging this gift came in. You can unwrap the real gift on your birthday when I wear what's in the box. Love, Jennifer." Over the next 2 days, I pulled out all the stops. I made sure to greet her with flowers, give her a foot massage, and make her favorite dinner. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She seemed to be merely enduring my affection. On my birthday, I made sure the kids had their homework done early. I didn't want any distractions from my gift. I was a bit surprised when Jennifer came home late from work. My confusion grew when she asked, "What's for dinner?" But I went along with it. To my surprise, I replied, "We're going out for pizza." The kids enjoyed it, and we went. I had arranged with the waitress for a birthday serenade, and just before we left, the waiter sang happy birthday to me. I thought I saw a flicker of surprise in Jennifer's eyes, but she quickly hid it. "I'll give you your gift later, Michael," she said, smiling. The drive home was tense. I nearly got into an accident. The 15 minutes it took the kids to get ready for bed felt grueling, but the next 15 minutes while they fell asleep were excruciating. Fortunately, Jennifer came back from a quick trip to the store for milk right after they were asleep. When I reached the bedroom, she wasn't there. I sat on the bed. A few moments later, she emerged from the bathroom in a flannel nightgown, no makeup, and her hair in a ponytail. By this point, I was losing patience with this game. "When do I get my gift?" I asked. She climbed into bed, pulled up the covers, and reached over to turn off the light, but stopped. "Oh, almost forgot," she said, reaching into her nightstand drawer. She pulled out a small square box, wrapped in the balloon paper we'd used for Michael's last birthday, and handed it to me. "Happy birthday, honey." And that was it. She rolled over, turned off the light, and went to sleep. I was too stunned to even open her gift. The next day, my depression hit full force. I replayed the entire day in my head, trying to understand what I'd done to ruin the evening. I was completely baffled. I stayed in that despair for almost 2 weeks. That damn gift haunted me, taunting me, reminding me of my failure. I'd heard all the cliches. The husband is the last to know, and so on. I have to admit, I was genuinely clueless. The idea of Jennifer cheating on me seemed so impossible that I hadn't even considered it. But that was the first thought that came to mind when she called 13 days after my birthday, saying, "I'll be home late. It's Alan's 30th birthday, and the team's throwing him a party." I don't remember replying or even walking to the bedroom closet. But I do remember looking at the empty space where my gift had been. For a long moment, I thought I might be having a heart attack. And for just a moment, I almost hoped I was, and that it would all end right then. Alan Henderson was Jennifer's boss, a cocky, smug advertising exec who was a few years younger than both of us. I'd only met him once, but he left a bad impression. He came across as completely fake. Emily's voice snapped me back. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked, watching me with worried eyes. I blinked and looked at her. "I'm fine, honey. Dad just ate something that didn't agree with him. I'll be out in a minute." I eventually left the bathroom, though I don't remember much after that. I remember grabbing my dusty bottle of scotch. Judging by the headache the next morning, I'd had several glasses. I had no idea when Jennifer got home. When I found her in the kitchen the next morning, feeding the kids, she acted as if nothing unusual had happened. She went about her routine, and the slight shudder I saw as she sat down to eat was all it took to eliminate the last bit of love I had for her. It was subtle, but it was there. I'd like to say I confronted my unfaithful wife, but I didn't. I was utterly crushed. I could barely function. For weeks, I moved like a zombie. Watching her go through our daily routines, I felt worse and worse. I thought I'd hit rock bottom. It took me that weekend, on our 15th anniversary, to shake myself out of it and decide to do something. I probably wouldn't have done anything. I acted like a coward. I knew it. I wish I could say I was surprised. There's probably some psychological term for it. If my father were alive, he'd simply call it cowardice. And he'd be right. It wasn't until my wife announced she had to attend a work conference that things started to clear up for me. She won't even be here for our anniversary, I thought, feeling bitter. I didn't know why it bothered me so much. It was just another layer of disrespect, but it stung because she didn't even seem aware of the date. After drowning my sorrows the night of our anniversary, I woke up angry. I've had enough, I told myself. I called my lawyer and set up an appointment. I was ready to end this charade. I thought my life couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I walked into the lawyer's office full of resolve, but that quickly turned to disbelief. I knew divorce could be rough, but I assumed my wife's cheating would help my case. Instead, my lawyer picked apart my assumptions. I had no evidence of the affair, and even if I did, it wouldn't impact the division of assets, 50-50ths. I had no proof she was an unfit parent, so the best I could hope for was joint custody. The income gap worked in her favor, meaning I'd likely be paying alimony and spousal support. She'd probably get primary custody and the right to stay in the house for the kids. My wife was a cheater, and I was a fool. I went from feeling defeated to downright angry. A few weeks later, my wife asked me, "You don't look well, Michael. Is something wrong?" "No, darling." At least she pretended to care. And I just drifted through life. Then I lost my job. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the best thing that could have happened to me. I was watching the evening news, absorbing one depressing story after another, feeling it all fit my mood. Then there it was. A major employer on the East Coast had gone bankrupt, leaving employees struggling for their last paychecks and worried about pensions. It struck me that maybe some people had it worse than I did. The analyst on TV said the employees would likely win a lawsuit against their employer, but it wouldn't matter because the money was already gone. It didn't take me long to piece together a plan. My wife couldn't take what wasn't there. If we had nothing, there'd be nothing to split. I knew I'd be hurting myself, but I was already set to lose half. Did I really care about the rest? I started with a simple approach. I was unemployed and had no plans to job hunt. I'd use our savings until it ran dry. It was a wild idea, and I doubted it would work, but it gave me something to hold on to. 2 years is a long time, and I was painfully bored, especially since I spent most of it alone. Jennifer had always been the heart of our social circle, and once she pulled away, I realized I didn't have any close friends. I was an only child. Both my parents had passed young. My dad from a heart attack, my mom from cancer. I was truly alone except for my kids, who were the only bright spot in my life. I enrolled in an executive MBA program. It was a local university, but pricey, costing almost $120,000 up front. I bought a new luxury SUV for $60,000. I maxed out my kids' college funds, which was another $260,000. I spent thousands on a new wardrobe and started taking out more cash twice a week. I dropped the kids at school, go to the bank, and then head to the lake. I never gambled with the cash. I'd take a few bills here and there just to show I'd been at the casino. I even saved receipts for lunch, snacks, and parking. Most of the cash went into a safe in our garage, my personal stash for after the divorce if things got rough. One more big expense was surveillance on my wife and her lover. I hired someone to get everything: videos, photos, a daily log of her activities. I'm embarrassed by how much it cost. You might wonder if she noticed my spending. I'd say yes, except for the gambling part. I had to tell her about the college fund since I needed her signature. She saw the new car and clothes. She didn't say anything. She probably assumed I was still working and that we were financially set. She even made some big purchases herself, but I didn't comment. I often wondered who her new lingerie was really for. We never discussed it. We were like cordial roommates, barely interested in closeness. No point even going there. Time with my kids was the highlight of my life. I tried to support whatever hobbies they wanted. We did homework, played games, went to parks, rode bikes, and watched movies. I'd taken on cooking, and the kids liked helping. I found easy recipes and let them try. Jennifer was around at some point each week. I didn't exclude her from family activities, but I didn't go out of my way to include her. If she wanted to join, she did. Quietly, I received weekly updates on her actions. I'd thought she was only involved with her boss, but it turned out there were other men from the office. Later, her clients joined the picture. It was painful to see. She had already fallen in my eyes, and having proof didn't make it better. In some way, it gave me closure, but not much. It became clear that Alan Henderson was not exactly a skilled lover, though he seemed capable of juggling several women at once. I found this surprising. I had assumed, given the gift, that he and my wife shared something meaningful, but in reality, they were more like casual hookups. The same went for most of the other 6 men she was seeing. About a year into this, I realized I hadn't had sex since I started down this path. It didn't bother me much. It was just another layer of my wonderful life. I eventually stopped monitoring her activities. It felt more like a chore going through the updates they sent. Despite my classes, taking care of the kids, and my gambling ruse, I had a lot of time on my hands. So I began planning my life post-marriage, which I assumed would happen someday. I started a new workout routine. I'd always been in decent shape, nothing special, of course, but I started achieving good results in bench pressing and running. I believe that big muscles and looks are largely genetic, and I didn't fall into either category, but Personally, I was happy with how I looked. I also started catching up on the latest news in my old industry, realizing I'd need a job at some point. A year away had put me further behind than I'd thought. I spent hours daily learning new technologies and software. I took a particular interest in my old company, CTS. They seemed stagnant, not losing market share but not gaining any either. In tech, standing still means falling behind. I also dove into studying divorce. Sure, I spent some time concocting new schemes to disrupt my soon-to-be ex-wife's life, but mostly I focused on understanding how divorce impacts kids. I had gone through most of my pain, and my kids were a big part of my life. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, I'd be fully prepared for their sake. There's a mountain of information out there, and a lot of it seemed like nonsense. About 8 months into my new life, though, I started to panic. My wife began coming home at the usual time, striking up conversations and asking how my day was. I gave her curt answers, which didn't seem to faze her. She even started dressing more provocatively for bed, seemingly trying to revive the closeness of our old life. A few weeks later, it got worse. After a year and a half of ignoring our lives, she suddenly complained about a lack of communication. She started talking about working on our marriage, and I just shut down. Silence became my answer to everything. Her attempts at reconciliation continued until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining table. The wrapping paper must have looked familiar since I used the same one from the last gift she gave me. The contents shouldn't have been a shock either. It had taken me 6 months to open my last birthday gift from her, a cheap digital watch from a convenience store, priced at $9.95. Seeing it made me furious. When I later saw a matching women's watch, I knew what I'd do. I bought it and waited 18 months to give it to her. I wish I could have seen her reaction, but we weren't there when she opened it. The kids and I had a late movie night and got home well past noon the next day. She left before any of us were up. Just like that, everything returned to normal. Jennifer started staying late at the office again, and we barely spoke at home. Finally, the day I'd been waiting for arrived. "Michael, I want a divorce." I hoped she'd handle it quickly, but nearly a week went by before I received her statement. It was almost laughable. Spousal and child support, an uneven asset split in her favor, and allegations of mental and emotional cruelty. I gave her until Monday, then took the kids camping. I didn't want them around for what was coming. We returned 6 days later, rested and refreshed. Jennifer was home, sitting alone in the living room, looking visibly unwell. Reflecting on it, I wondered which part surprised me the most. I filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity, requesting the house, our last real asset, and full custody of the kids. I also requested spousal and child support since I'd been unemployed and the primary caregiver for 2 years. I filed alienation of affection claims against Jennifer's 7 partners, even though I had no illusions of winning. But Illinois law allowed it, so I went for it. I also filed civil suits against her employer and 3 client companies for exploiting her. I didn't expect to win, but the bad press might help my case. Finally, I sent a DVD of Jennifer's greatest hits to her parents and best friends so she'd know I wasn't afraid to use it. She must have known the evidence I had. All of this was in my counterclaim, but I didn't want to take any chances. The kids had a snack and headed to their rooms for bed, barely acknowledging their mom. She made no effort to connect with them. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and went to the living room, sitting across from her. She avoided eye contact for a long time, so I simply enjoyed my drink. Besides looking physically unwell, she seemed to be crying about something. Perhaps she was hurt in more ways than one. She finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "You're going to ruin me." I waited until her eyes met mine before responding. It took a moment. "I really hope so." I had imagined this moment would feel more intense, especially as a single tear formed and slid down her cheek. But I felt nothing. She asked, "Do you hate me that much?" "Oh no, Jennifer, I don't hate you. Hate requires effort, and I don't expend any effort on you. All my energy is focused on taking care of myself and my children." "I'm still your wife," she insisted. "Stop." I shook my head. "I won't let someone like you tarnish the memory of my wife. My wife was loving, caring, a true partner and mother to my kids. She's gone. You're just the woman who replaced her. Don't talk as if you mean anything to me." It was a long time before she spoke again. "What am I supposed to do now? Are you actually asking or just being rhetorical?" I didn't wait for an answer. "There are a few options. You could go far away and try starting over. Honestly, I'd recommend it." I won't allow you to have any real place in our children's lives, so that shouldn't weigh on your choice to leave. Or you could stick around here hoping I keep quiet. But who knows what people will hear about you, or what kind of job someone like you could get. Maybe you could settle down with a guy who doesn't mind what you've become, but what kind of person would he be? Or you could end it all. Though, I'd rather you didn't. It would rob me of seeing you deal with the consequences. Not that my opinion mattered when you chose to start an affair with your boss. I'd rehearsed this speech in my head for months. Watching her spirit crumble with each word, I thought I'd feel satisfaction. Instead, I just felt empty. Life post-divorce was dominated by legal battles. I ended up doing far better than expected, receiving over $1 million in settlements from 3 companies whose employees had been involved with my wife. It surprised even my lawyer, who hadn't expected much. We figured those companies just wanted to avoid bad publicity after seeing what we'd done to my ex-wife's employer. We destroyed her company with discovery motions, depositions, and leaks to the media. I even took things further, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients with the details about my wife, her boss, and their escapades. Over time, their revenue dwindled. Employees left to avoid the association, and eventually they filed for bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. The $200,000 settlement from that was less than the others, but it was sweet. I got nothing from the alienation of affection claims, as expected, though 4 of the involved men's wives eventually filed for divorce. It wasn't all happy endings for them. In pursuing all this, I ended up hurting myself too. It wasn't unusual to run into people who knew about my situation. For a while, the mocking and whispers got out of hand. Strangely enough, I didn't care. Already feeling like a failure, their words didn't touch me. A few of these people were actually clever. Protecting my children from the fallout was always my top priority. They were down for a while, but bounced back eventually. My biggest success was returning to CTS as Vice President of Design and Development. Returning to programming helped me escape personal struggles. Over 2 difficult years, I developed an add-on to the main CTS software, allowing it to integrate seamlessly with 2 competitor platforms. I founded a company to market my software, and within a year, received acquisition offers from all 3 major competitors. CTS bought my company and software for $11 million, along with a lucrative compensation package. Though I'd thought of retiring, my lack of a social life convinced me that I'd turn into a recluse without a reason to get up every day. My new income allowed me to hire a sweet older woman as a part-time housekeeper and nanny for the kids. A year later, Mrs. Marlene Jensen moved in full-time, living in the apartment above our new garage. She became like a grandmother to my children, warm and kind, but firm when needed. What I valued most was her wisdom and the advice she gave my children, advice that only comes with experience. I loved my children deeply and did my best to be a devoted father, but I was also damaged, bitter, and harsh. I turned to her for guidance, and she was my rock whenever I had difficult decisions to make. My kids grew up to be well-adjusted adults, and I saw them with their families from time to time. Over the years, though, our closeness faded. I didn't blame them. It was better they kept their distance so my bitterness wouldn't seep into their lives. Mrs. Jensen stayed with us until the kids left for college, then retired. I offered her free room and board as a pension. She was a constant in my life. For 15 years, she gently encouraged me to live again and find someone to share my life with. I appreciated her efforts, but ultimately, she passed away knowing I would remain alone. I never opened up to anyone else. My friendships were shallow and unfulfilling. I never dated except for a few group dinners with acquaintances. I gained a reputation for being a cold, unyielding person, and most people avoided me. I couldn't blame them. I'd brought it on myself. My physical needs were easily handled. With my growing wealth, I kept a steady rotation of call girls, paying well for their time and company. Typically, it was just about having sex and then sending them on their way. One of them, Candy, real name Mary Beth, stood out to me. She was passionate and willing, and I think I meant a little more to her than just a client. But I couldn't let anyone else get close to my own baggage, so when she began showing signs of attachment, I let her go. If you're curious about Jennifer, she faced a rough life. She tried to reconnect for nearly a year. I'm not sure what she hoped to achieve. Reconciliation, or perhaps a relationship with the kids. I gave her a fair warning, but she didn't heed it. She stayed in Chicago, and I made sure her past was there to greet her at every turn. When she applied for jobs, her record somehow always followed her. When she started dating, which was right away, I sent her suitors reminders. revealing exactly who they'd be letting into their lives. It didn't matter if they stayed after learning the truth, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite history and ignore what she'd done. If I had to live with it every day, so would she. Jennifer continued her constant stream of calls and emails that I never answered, filling up my inbox. A part of me took a dark satisfaction in her suffering. Early on, maybe I should have sought help. It might have saved part of my sanity and allowed me to rebuild a normal life. But I never did. And as time passed, it seemed too late to change. I could have changed my phone number or had someone else sort through the messages, but I didn't. I could have blocked her emails to avoid accidentally seeing her apologies, but they meant nothing to me. Of course, things spiraled. Yes, she claimed she'd always loved me and that she'd suffered enough. I responded with a gift and a simple note. I bought the most revealing lingerie I could find at her favorite store, neatly wrapped it with a white ribbon to accentuate the pink box, and added a handwritten note. I imagine she caught the irony when she opened the card addressed to the witch. One of her boyfriends even tried to confront me for maltreating her, showing up at my door full of liquid courage and shoving me back as soon as I opened it. That was his mistake. I'm nothing extraordinary, no martial arts or combat training, just an average guy. I'd never been violent or even in a fight, but I had a reservoir of rage, unspent and undiluted, directed at my wife and her lovers. He ended up on the receiving end. In the end, I got away with minor burns and a cracked rib. He was lucky to survive. He pled guilty to misdemeanor attack and trespassing, receiving probation. The years of reconstructive surgery and rehab probably left a stronger impression on him. After that, Jennifer stopped trying to contact me. I eventually stopped monitoring her after she landed a full-time job cleaning rooms at a roadside hotel in rural Virginia, 700 miles away. The only time I saw her again was 16 years later at our daughter's wedding. I know the kids reconnected with Jennifer after they graduated from college, and I never tried to stop them. The years hadn't been kind to her. She'd gained at least 40 pounds, had deep lines around her mouth, and bore other telltale signs of smoking. A new habit. She looked worn down and old, but somewhere beneath it, I still saw the woman I once loved. I felt nothing for her, but I saw her. She sat quietly in the bridal section near the back of the church, keeping her interactions with our daughter brief, polite, and distant. She never tried to approach me. All evening we stayed at a distance, never coming within 30 feet of each other. She stood on the curb, waiting for a taxi. When I noticed the modest gold ring with a tiny diamond on her finger, I felt a faint smile creep up, my first in a long time. Maybe she'd made a better choice than I had. I walked over, studying the ring for a moment before finally meeting her gaze. Sadness clouded her eyes. "For the record," she said quietly, "you ruined my life first." I glanced from her hand back to her face. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy." With that, I turned and walked to my car where my driver awaited. "Good evening, Mr. Smith. I hope you had a pleasant evening. Are we heading to the club?" "It went as well as I expected, Jonathan. Let's just go straight home. Tonight I'd rather be alone." "Of course, sir." As we pulled away, I tried not to look back, but in the rearview mirror I caught a glimpse of her waving goodbye.
Michael Smith wasn't conventionally handsome or particularly noticeable at first glance, but he was kind, somewhat attractive, and incredibly smart. We met on one of my worst nights in college, left alone at a frat party by my sorority sisters who ditched me to hook up with random guys. After 2 hours of fending off drunk strangers, Michael approached, introduced himself softly, and held my gaze. Just before leaving, he offered me his number, saying he'd love to grab coffee sometime. That brief encounter ended up being the highlight of my semester. After a week, I reached out and we met for coffee. Talking with him was easy. He was knowledgeable on every topic, studying computer science, but clearly well-rounded enough for any field. He asked about my studies, especially ancient philosophy, which I struggled with as a business and advertising major. He suggested studying together, and we soon found ourselves in the library. That night, he patiently helped me prepare for my philosophy exam, adapting his explanations when I didn't understand, never making me feel stupid. When I passed, he sounded genuinely happy for me, though he downplayed his role, calling it a selfish excuse to spend time together. Over the following weeks, Michael's focus on his studies and his lack of interest in parties drew me in. We didn't go on formal dates, but he'd call daily, leave thoughtful notes, and ask about my family, dreams, and interests. In turn, he was open when I asked about his life. One day I asked him what he feared most. After a pause, he admitted he was afraid of not being a good father. As an only child who lost his parents in high school and grew up with a distant uncle, he had little experience with a supportive family. He wanted to marry and have kids, but feared he wouldn't know how to be a good father. When he looked at me, waiting for a reaction, I simply said, "Not too much, Michael, just enough." About a month later, he asked if I was free on Saturday. When I said yes, he planned to pick me up, keeping his intentions secret. The anticipation kept me on edge, with my sorority sisters smiling knowingly. When Michael finally arrived, he was dressed in burgundy and sky blue, along with 3 of his fraternity brothers who brought a large refrigerator and heated trays of food. He handed me a West Ham shirt, a DVD, and flashed a big smile, asking to see the house's main room. As we walked in, my sorority sisters and his friends, all dressed in West Ham colors, began chanting. I was stunned. Once, I'd mentioned missing my family's trip to England to watch my cousin who played for West Ham United. I couldn't go because of exams and had felt disappointed. Michael had arranged everything. He'd asked a friend to record a West Ham game, learned the team chants, and even brought English ale and fish and chips. When my cousin scored, he silenced the room so I could watch. It was delayed but still felt special, something even my family didn't experience. After the game, he and his friends cleaned up and headed out, leaving me to fend off my friends' teasing about the look in my eyes. It was worth it. Over the next weeks, we kept meeting for coffee and exchanging notes. One day, he nervously asked if I'd like to have dinner with him on Friday, officially as a date. I said yes, and he broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. From that point on, everything felt like a whirlwind of love and joy. I thrived in school and felt more confident. Michael always made me feel special, even though he humbly saw himself as lucky to be with me. He was smart, polite, well-dressed, and modest, never flaunting his intelligence or popularity. At graduation, my sorority hosted its usual ritual where each sister's boyfriend received reviews. Michael received only positive reviews, a first in the event's 29-year history. I was proud beyond words, but couldn't tell him, as tradition kept it a secret. A few days later, Michael drove me home to Chicago. He'd landed a job there, and during the trip, we held hands, talked, and stopped for breakfast. When we arrived, he charmed my parents and even invited my dad out for a beer. Watching them leave, my mom turned to me teary-eyed and said, "Jennifer, this one's a keeper. Trust me, Mom, I know." Michael and my dad were all smiles and laughter as they came back to the front door. After their 2-hour outing, Michael told me he'd be back for dinner and quickly left to check into his hotel. That's when he shared that he'd asked my father's permission to marry me. That night was unforgettable. After a romantic Italian dinner, Michael proposed on the Willis Tower skydeck, overlooking the stunning Chicago skyline, a view that seemed to mirror the happiness I felt inside. In college, being a maid had felt slightly embarrassing, like I was the last one in my sorority, but that night it became a meaningful gift. Michael was equally inexperienced, yet he was tender, loving, and patient, making it an incredible first experience. When I asked how he was so gentle and skilled, he simply whispered, "I read a lot of books." Our life felt close to perfect. Michael quickly landed a great job and moved up the ladder, and our first decade of marriage was filled with joy and growth. Our children enriched our lives, though those years aren't central to my story of what went wrong. Reflecting on it now, I realized that I allowed my insecurities to take root because I didn't fully share them with Michael. Michael was always open with me, even about his insecurities. He treated me as an equal partner in every decision, despite his higher income and financial savvy. Mostly I felt valued, but sometimes I felt inadequate, like I wasn't doing enough to match his contributions. I never expressed this to him, but I now know he would have helped me if I had. He loved me deeply and would have supported me. Over the years, these insecurities grew, and by the time our kids started school, I felt a need for something of my own. I didn't want a lover. I loved my husband and felt fulfilled in our relationship, though our love life had become a bit routine. I knew Michael would have liked to try new things, but I was hesitant, thinking it might disrupt a good thing. Instead, I wanted to feel a real sense of independence, so I decided to get a job. I prepared to defend my choice to Michael, but he simply said, "That sounds great, Jennifer, whatever makes you happy." With his support, I dove into my new role, feeling empowered and self-sufficient. Looking back, my early pride in my newfound independence feels painfully naive, but at the time it was thrilling. My workplace was filled with youthful energy and boldness. The atmosphere was openly flirtatious, with some colleagues having casual relationships. To them, Zex wasn't about commitment, but confidence. There was no secrecy, and no one seemed to judge. My boss, Alan Henderson, was notorious around the office for his casual flings, and people often joked about his latest conquests. He wasn't my type, and I initially brushed him off. Still, it made me wonder if Michael and I were missing something in our intimate life. My social circle didn't discuss Zex openly, unlike the constant talk I heard at work after our first Christmas party together. Introducing Alan to Michael changed everything. I sensed a tension between them, though they acted cordial. After that, I avoided talking about work with Michael and never mentioned Alan. Meanwhile, at the office, Alan's interest in me grew. He started praising my work publicly, inviting me to lunch to discuss projects, and subtly complimenting my appearance with terms like sexy and provocative. Months passed, and I let myself be drawn in by Alan's attention. I can't recall how I ended up half-dressed with Alan on his desk after hours, but I know I felt a rush I hadn't felt in years. Later, looking back, I saw the depth of my betrayal. Michael, my true partner, had always been considerate and open, gently trying to bring more excitement into our relationship, but I had ignored him. Alan's manipulation became clear when he didn't react well to me ending things. The next day, he laughed at me and threw me out of his office. Later, I found a package on my desk with compromising photos of us and a note to meet him at 5:30. Those photos kept me tethered to him for another 18 months. I became trapped, forced into situations I hated, feeling like a pawn in Alan's twisted game. Eventually, I found the courage to say, "I've had enough. Show the photos if you want." Alan's dismissive laugh signaled it was over. I walked away, feeling both liberated and foolish. When I woke up from my nightmare, I was stunned by the state of our house. Michael and the kids seemed to be managing perfectly well without me. Deep down, I'd thought they'd struggle once they faced the neglect I had subjected them to, but the reality was the complete opposite. It seemed I wasn't needed at all. Michael was clearly thriving, new car, new clothes, and looking every bit the successful leader. Realizing how long I had ignored my family made me feel awful. I resolved to devote myself to them from that point on and do everything I could to make up for my betrayal. But a gap had opened between us that hadn't been there before. I often wondered how long it had been growing. Michael never raised his voice or argued with me, but he treated me like an unwelcome guest. I decided to take real action. I tried to seduce him with lingerie and hints, but nothing worked. He barely touched me. Months later, I took stock of our marriage. No closeness, no sex, and no communication. I couldn't live like that, so I suggested marriage counseling. That's when Michael stopped speaking to me altogether. Not just a lack of trust. He went silent for weeks. It pushed me to the edge. When my birthday came, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Surely he wouldn't ignore me on my birthday. But I was so wrong. I came home expecting a celebration, only to find the house empty. On the dining table, there was only a small wrapped box. I knew what it was even before I opened it. Years earlier, I'd panicked and forgotten Michael's birthday, grabbing a cheap watch from a nearby store with the intention of making it up to him later, a promise I never kept. My mistake was thoughtless. His gift was intentional. By the time I went to bed, I was furious. Keeping the kids from me on my birthday felt cruel. I couldn't believe he'd go that far. And that gift, it was beyond the line. I should have realized something was terribly wrong. The symbolism should have clued me in. Michael wasn't a vindictive person. He'd always been the kindest, most caring man I'd known. If I hadn't let my anger blind me, I might have saved our marriage. If I'd confessed my mistakes and asked for forgiveness, maybe there'd have been hope. But at that moment, I stopped focusing on fixing things and started thinking about divorce. Sad but determined, I spent weeks with my lawyer, planning the details. I told her about Michael's distance and even cruelty, how he kept the kids from me, ignored counseling, and had gone silent. My lawyer went after my claims, assuring me I'd be compensated fairly. Reviewing the terms felt like I was securing a fair deal and standing up for what I needed to move on. All that was left was to break the news. I stood silently in the doorway of his office, looking at the man who had once been my husband and soulmate. He looked like the same person, yet he wasn't. Finally, I had enough. "Michael, I want a divorce." A long silence followed, but he showed no emotion. It almost looked like he was smiling, but maybe it was just shock. He had to be shocked because his response was so unexpected. No yelling, no questions. "Fine," he said. That was it. The following Friday, he was served with the divorce papers. That weekend, Michael seemed in a surprisingly good mood. But if he was trying to make amends, it was too late. I was in no mood for reconciliation. He even saw me off at the door when I left for work on Monday morning. Too little, too late, I thought. The moment I stepped into the office, an uneasy feeling washed over me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. In the conference room, my boss, the company president, and our corporate lawyer were locked in a heated argument, papers flying back and forth between them. Their commotion absorbed my attention so completely that I didn't even notice the man standing by my desk, until he spoke, making me jump. "Jennifer Smith?" I blinked, taken aback. "Yes?" He extended a stack of documents toward me. "You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope, snapped a quick photo of me, and walked away. I didn't even have time to sit down, let alone look at the documents inside. The moment he left, an HR manager and a security guard appeared. "Mrs. Smith, you're being suspended pending an investigation into allegations of inappropriate conduct in the workplace. Please gather your personal items and leave the premises," she said. It was humiliating to pack my things while my colleagues watched. Being escorted out was even worse. I had no idea what was happening. I was barely out of the parking lot when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. She didn't even give me a chance to say hello before launching into a tirade, berating me for hiding critical information and making her look like a fool. Those were the only phrases that made any sense. I drove home in silence. The house was empty when I arrived. It wasn't until I'd calmed down enough to remember the envelope that I realized the nightmare I'd set in motion. Michael's counter-petition was brutal. Almost all of my affairs were documented. Our savings were gone. He'd spent nearly everything. But the word infidelity hit me hardest. I thought things couldn't get worse, but I was wrong. I tried calling my parents for support. My father called me an idiot and hung up. He didn't have to explain why. I already knew. Those next 7 days were the loneliest of my life, though later I'd look back on them as some of the better days. I found a note from Michael later saying he'd taken the kids camping and would be back on Sunday. That first night, my oldest friend Rebecca called around 7 p.m. She told me Michael had sent her a DVD and warned me I didn't want to know its contents. Over the next few days, my lawyer laid out just how hopeless my situation was. I'd been fired for misconduct, and Michael had filed lawsuits against my company, several clients, and all my affair partners. I'd lose custody of my kids and everything else. By that point, I was willing to do anything if Michael would just call off the legal attacks. I tried to prepare myself for his return, but I couldn't stop the tears. When he finally came home with the kids, I was a wreck. The kids walked past me as though I were invisible, and Michael followed them, a beer in hand, his expression cold and indifferent. I barely managed to get the words out. "You're going to ruin me," I whispered. His response, laced with hatred, was devastating. "God, I hope so." I wasn't really talking to him, just voicing my thoughts. But he launched into a tirade that lasted several minutes, each word tearing me down further. When he finished, he simply walked away. I didn't give up after that. I tried to reconnect, but Michael wouldn't talk to me. I wondered how he and the kids were coping without any money, but they seemed fine. Sometimes I'd watch from a distance as he dropped them off or picked them up from school. I couldn't find a job, so I collected unemployment benefits. My parents refused to speak to me. I drifted between different men's homes, mostly divorced men, never staying long. One day I'd be welcome, and the next they'd ask me to leave. On my lawyer's advice, I began seeing a therapist. She thought showing remorse and seeking help might improve my case. I had little hope, but I worked through several issues, most of which I've shared here. The best advice she gave me came toward the end of our sessions. She told me to run far, far away. Somehow, knowing Michael was aware of my infidelity hurt even more. I cried uncontrollably. At the time, I was living with a friend's friend, a decent guy named Robert. who seemed interested in something more. When he came in to see what was wrong, I noticed he'd been drinking. When he saw the package, he got furious and stormed out before I could stop him. I got worried when Robert hadn't returned after several hours. I should have been more alarmed. At the hospital, the nurses wouldn't tell me much, but I pieced the story together. Apparently, Robert confronted Michael, and Michael nearly knocked him to pass away. Robert's face was disfigured. He had a concussion, internal injuries, and a shattered left leg. I was terrified. My problems were hurting the people around me. At my next therapy session, I shared the story. My therapist started asking questions about Michael. I told her everything I knew. He was an only child, orphaned young, deeply devoted to me and the kids, and I shared what he'd done to Robert. By the end, she looked visibly shaken. "You need to leave and never look back. Don't contact him. Don't let him know where you are. There's no hope of reconciling. If you push him, he will likely eliminate you. You've broken a fragile person who's endured lifelong disappointments. He'll never forgive or forget. Just go." And so I ran. I left behind memories of my once perfect life for a rundown college town in Virginia, where I found a job that was even worse. Years later, I met a man who could tolerate my past. The best I can say is he didn't smell bad or hit me. There was no love between us, only friendship. It felt like part of my punishment. As my children grew older, they reached out from time to time, mostly to say hello and remind me they were still alive, and that they knew I was too. But they never asked to meet or have me in their lives. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to flourish in my absence. I followed his success as best I could. He became a superstar in software, amassing a vast fortune. His personal life remained a mystery. I only saw him once more, at our daughter's wedding. The invitation had surprised me. When he appeared, he looked incredible, just like the man I had once loved and ultimately betrayed. I felt a wave of nerves as he approached, clearly ready with one final biting remark. "For the record," I said, "you ruined my life first." He glanced down at the modest wedding ring on my finger, and for a moment, I regretted wearing it. "I'm glad you found someone," he added. "I hope he makes you happy," and with that, he turned and walked away.